Sir, welcome to Rush to Reason. How are you today, sir?
Great. It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great having you. I appreciate it very much. So I just played a little spoof video there from Mark Dice about the white privilege tax that, of course, doesn't exist, but a lot of people were for it anyways. Well, I'm going to get back to that once we get done with you. With you, though, dear sir, we want to talk a little bit about some of the things going on, Islamic-wise or Muslim-wise. So, first of all, what's going on what's your take on the Middle East is what I really should say.
Well, I think, it's interesting. The world we saw what's happening in 2011, and you had the revolutions that began in Tunisia, then went to Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and it was an opportunity. My grandfather and then my father ultimately escaped Syria in the mid-'60s and came to America, and they had thought at the time that the peoples of the Middle East were doomed to live under the most authoritarian dictatorial regimes for generations to come, and they were right for a while. And then come 2011, here's an opportunity for change, and because of social media, Egypt was the Facebook revolution, the Libyans sort of had a Twitter one, and Syria was ultimately the YouTube revolution because they were putting on YouTube all the different massacres that were happening to show the world what was happening. And yet these opportunities were lost because the people knew how to rebel, but they didn't really know what to replace it with. They didn't have a infrastructure, a civil society, if you will. And if you look at what happened in the Soviet Union when it fell in the 20th century, the West was involved in helping some of the countries that succeeded in creating free markets, like Estonia and others that have become successful democracies. The West helped. They didn't send troops in. We helped intellectually. We helped with resources, and it ended up being an investment that was worthwhile. In the Middle East, this administration has avoided any interactions and has let those vacuums get filled with first massacres and then ultimately with authoritarian, even worse regimes, be it Iran, be it ISIS, which is a militant regime, militant terrorist organization that now is beginning to claim a state. So the cancers of the 20th century have only spread and metastasized rather than beginning to get treated, which could have been the opportunity of 2011.
Got it. Now, you are a Muslim yourself, correct?
Yes.
First, if I'm reading this right, first-generation American Muslim.
Yes, I was. My family's from Syria and was raised a American Muslim. Was raised to not only love America, but was taught that I could practice my faith more freely here than in any so-called Muslim country. And that's one of the reasons I joined the Navy. I served 11 years in the American military, was on a Navy scholarship through medical school. My last billet was as a physician to Congress. And my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, talks about that and why, how much work we have to do as Muslims to, I look upon my faith as a personal faith between me and God. And, my heroes of the work that I do are people like Thomas Paine and Benjamin Rush and others who felt that, while America is a Christian country by values, the word Christian is not in the documents because they wanted to prevent the establishment of the church and government. And I think Islam is in that same time in history in which we have to defeat the theocrats. And right now, my faith is dominated globally in almost every organization by theocrats who believe the faith is not only personal, but it should be part of the government, part of the law, which is Sharia, and it should dominate, and it's not just a personal choice.
Got it. So what would you say to those Muslims that believe in total Sharia law, where somebody like yourself is going to be more of a constitutionalist? How we talked about this a little bit yesterday. How do you bridge that gap? I mean, how do you, even as a Muslim yourself, explain to those that think Sharia law should be the law of the land? How do you tell them that just can't happen here on American soil?
What we do is we have a Muslim Liberty Project, and it's not only about American ideas. It's about what is the legacy they want to leave for their kids. And if we teach them, the Muslim Liberty Project is directed to youth 15 to 30, and we tell them, okay, that prayer is a choice. Even though we're told to pray 5 times a day, we don't force each other to pray. Fasting is a choice, which is one of the most known things we need to do. Charity is a choice, and yet we know God tells us we have to do it. So if those are all choices and God observes whether we do them, even the less important laws that are in the Quran need to be choices, and they should not be mandated by government. That instead, our laws should be based in reason. So we tell them that, if you really believe that certain passages talk about a lack of coercion, that even those who reject God, which we believe as Christians do is the worst sin, which is atheism, then if those are free to do that, how can you mandate other laws about separating women and all these other things that are 13th century type laws that actually are man-made laws? So the entire juristic texts of Sharia are man-made. Those might be implemented under the name of God, but our youth pretty much, after we talk to them, say, you know what, that makes sense. These are man-made. It's up to an individual Muslim to determine which part of the Sharia we accept and which we don't, and we can have arguments and criticism. And there's an Islamic concept called ijtihad, which means the critical interpretation of Scripture and law in light of modern day. And if we're going to do that, then we need to have the space in the laboratory to do that. And that's why America's the best country and democracy in the world, is it has that laboratory to do that. And American Muslims need to, we might only be 3 million, but we have a responsibility because of the freedom we have here to begin to reform the ideas that could help transform so many other countries around the world that are Muslim majority.
Got it. All right. We're talking to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. And Dr. Zuhdi, we need to take a real quick timeout. I've got a caller also that has a question for you. Can you hang on for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's do this real quick. We need to talk about Steve Olson and his wellness dentistry.
Oh, Steve is fantastic.
Steve was on today.
We got to interview him on his own show.
2 to 2:30 today. He was on with us, and he's going to be on every Wednesday from 2 to 2:30. He believes in really just total dentistry wellness. What he's really going to try to tell you guys or teach everyone, I should say, in the coming weeks is what goes into your mouth has a great impact upon your entire life, and he's really big on that. So what I would do is encourage you to listen to him every single Wednesday from 2 to 2:30. And if you've got any questions or you want to schedule an appointment, do it now. Call 303-900-4067. It's Colorado Wellness Dentistry. Actually, get my tongue tied here. Colorado Wellness Dentistry, Steve Olson. It's the Steve Olson Show. I should say the Colorado Dentistry Show.
It's the Colorado Dentistry Show.
There you go. On Wednesdays, 2 to 2:30, and a great partner here on Rush to Reason. He's up next.
This is Rush to Reason on KLZ 560.
All right, and we are back. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. I've got him on the line. I'm going to bring up Greg, who is also with us real quick. And so he's got a couple of questions, or 8 questions, I should say, for Dr. Zuhdi. Greg, welcome. What's going on, sir?
Hey, John. I appreciate you being on, Zuhdi. I've been listening to you intently because you're one of the few voices, and I think you said the other day on one of the interviews that you realized you had to be outspoken because there were so few. And that kind of goes to my question. You were distinguishing between the Muslim movement that was Islamist, that was more for the radical interpretation of the Quran. And I wanted to ask, is there a central authority worldwide somewhere, aside from your calling for the Muslims in the United States to speak for more reason, that could call for a less radical interpretation and a counter within the Muslim movement to the Islamist movement?
That's great. And to make things easier for everybody else to hear, Greg, I'm going to drop you off so Zuhdi can actually answer that easier. So, Zuhdi, go ahead.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I do get asked that frequently. And all I can tell you is that while it would make it easier to find that person, I know like when President al-Sisi of Egypt gave his speech January 1st, and he was calling for reform, and he really was speaking in the belly of the beast to what would be the Vatican of Sunni Islam there in Al-Azhar University. But he was telling them what? He said, you need to condemn the violence, and he was talking about the means, but he never used terms like freedom and democracy because he's a military dictator. So at the end of the day, first of all, those who would be leading right now are typically, if they're not Islamists, are monarchs or dictators, and there is no, if you will, institution or tradition of democracy and critical thinking. Number two, In Islam, I think actually we need decentralization rather than centralization. Just like the creation of America, where Christians were escaping theocracy, they didn't say, the way to defeat the Church of England is to create a new central church to tell us a moderate Christianity. No, they said we need to create a society that separated not church and state, but separated the establishment that prevented the church from establishing government.
Got it.
And allowed us to each be individual and free. And that's what I think the ideas that Muslims need to advance in liberty.
Got it. Question I have for you, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, in being I'm a born-again believer, Christian myself. And so, I know in the Christian faith, for example, it's our goal as Christians to see as many other Christians and even non-Christians come to Christ, have a full understanding of Him, live a holy life, continue to be, working towards that, through the Holy Spirit and so on. And that's kind of our mantra, our doctrine, and it's my duty as a fellow Christian to those other Christians to encourage, not force, but encourage them to be the best Christian possible and live out what our Bible says. So as a Muslim, how do you get around, in your world, how do you get around not teaching how do I want to say this? In your particular faith, if you were to read and believe and practice everything inside the Quran, you could very easily become radical Islam. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a number of very important things. Number one, right now, most of the evangelical Muslims that believe in spreading the word and doing what they call da'wah, or, they call it education by definition, but it's actually evangelism and trying to convert people.
Right.
The issue is not just actually more dangerous than those that do it by force, is those that want to do it moderately, not by force. And the reason I say that's more dangerous is they're not just spreading a faith, they're spreading a political system that wants to create Islamic states. The evil empire of the 21st century, I believe, is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that wants to create Islamic states all over the world. So you're right. This is not just faith evangelism. It's a political movement that hijacks the faith in order to advance a political theocracy or a theopolitical system. So that's why I don't really believe in evangelism per se. As a Muslim, I think that, we're still at a stage where we need to protect our faith personally with God. And I will tell you, however, that the bigger problem is, I learned when I was growing up in Wisconsin, my parents taught me, it'd be much better to befriend a Christian or Jew who's honest and truthful and believes in their values than a Muslim who's dishonest and may pray but yet is corrupt. So this is why it's important
which by the way is
back to the values.
Which, by the way, Dr. Zudi, it's not much different on the Christian side of the fence. I'd much rather have you as a friend and have you be open and honest and talk to me than some Christians that just quote unquote practice maybe on Sunday but don't live that way the rest of the week. I'd rather have somebody that's going to be honest with me all the time.
Exactly. So that's why, to me, if you look at the reason Iraq fell apart after Saddam went away, the reason Syria doesn't have an alternative to Assad or ISIS, which there are third alternatives, and when you live under dictatorship for 2 generations, corruption, endemic thievery, and lying, and a lack of God becomes part of the society. And that's why, if we have a strategy, we have to look at what's our strategy for American security and for advancing liberty. It's either to say, well, we're going to convert a quarter of the world's population, which is, doomed to failure, or we say, you know what, let's try to create societies where we have a free market of ideas, where Christians have the freedom to evangelize, Muslims have the freedom to talk about and loving their faith, and then you have societies based in freedom and liberty. That's really the most we can ask, and I think that would allow free markets and free markets of ideas and businesses, et cetera, to thrive, and then you can start to get into the details of the theology, because as long as there's theocracy, nobody can survive there. And if you look in the prisons of Saudi Arabia and Iran, the first people that go to jail are not the religious minorities. It's actually the majority that try to fight for freedoms that are the biggest threat to their regimes there that end up in jail.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. So Question for you, and this is really, I'm really feel like I'm talking more personal. I apologize to the rest of my audience because I'm asking a lot of personal questions, but this is just stuff that I've always wondered. I'm not a Muslim. I don't know the Quran like you do. I know my scripture and the Holy Bible. I know that side of it because ultimately, you can't really ever be a Christian your entire life. At some point, I said this yesterday, you have to come to a point where you decide, what is your faith going to be? And for me, I had to cross that bridge also as an adult, but I was raised in a Christian home, so I've known the Holy Bible for 51 years. Well, I guess I wasn't reading when I was born, but you get the drift. I'm 51 years old. I was born and raised in a Christian home, and I've pretty much been in that world my entire life. So, what do you, when you're on that side of the fence, on your Muslim side of the fence, and you know that I don't know the Quran, you know it better than I, but aren't there passages and things in the Quran that basically tell fellow Muslims that I am the infidel, I'm the guy that's supposed to be wiped off the planet? How do you counter that with your fellow Muslims?
That's a great question, and I think it's very fair because anybody can talk about reform, but not to use an inept pun, but the devil is in the details, right? So when you are looking at Muslim reform, certainly in my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, the reason one of the last chapters, I left it to the end, is the chapter about the Quran. And I talk about passages that we have to deal with and we have to come to terms with. Now, there are some that think, well, you reform it by, removing it. And, well, you can't do that because to a Muslim, the Arabic script is inviolable. It is the word of God. So What do? You can change the interpretation. You don't change the script. You say, listen, the interpretation, the translations, things as simple as the most commonly said passage in the Quran is the first one that says, the opening prayer that Muslims say 17 times a day minimum. That translates it says, follow the path of God and not those who go astray, period, in Arabic. It ends there. And if you look at the Saudi and the 90% of the translations, there's in parentheses it says, not like the Jews and Christians. Now, they put that in English, but the Arabic doesn't say that. So they add things into the translation that were not there, and I think many of the passages, like it says, kill the infidels where you find them. It says, do not take Jews and Christians as friends. The word friends in Arabic actually is not friends. The word is awliya, which is legal sponsors. So long story short is there is a way to interpret it true to the language. So the problem is actually ignorance of the root Arabic. We believe as modern and moderate Muslims who are believing in liberty that you can take the same scripture and interpret it in a very moderate way. For example, polygamy. There's no doubt the Quran allows polygamy. And yet I've never met a Muslim married to more than one wife. Does that mean we violate the religion? No, we say, you know what? That was for the 7th century and doesn't apply today. So there are things that you can relegate to history and separate religion from history.
Interesting. All right, we've got another caller. Have you got another minute to hang on with us?
Sure.
I'd love to have you. It's been a great conversation. Rick, stay with us. Don't go away. I need to talk to you about Extreme Auto Repair. We're actually going to be out there in 2 weeks. Dan and I, 2 weeks. So not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday. So October 17th, we're going to be out there for a free, cost-saving month of October is car care. Car care awareness is what the month of October is about. And we're going to be out at Extreme Auto Repair doing just that. It'll be a free event. We'll teach you about how to take care of your vehicle, save you money. It's at Extreme Auto Repair right now. They've got a 20% off deal if you mention Rush to Reason. 102-74 South Dransfeld Road. The phone number 303-841-1071. They will go to the Extreme for you. All right, John Rush to Reason, KLZ 560. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is with us. Had a great conversation so far. So, Dr. Zuhdi, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and bring another caller up real quick so we can get him on. Rick, welcome to Rush to Reason. How are you, sir?
Thank you, John. Doing well. I'm really enjoying this.
Thank you.
Dr. Jasser, isn't it true that a person can be a good Muslim while at the same time maybe believing in certain aspects of Sharia, but not necessarily in those aspects of Sharia which impose or impinge on government and want to all
right, and again, when we have two on, it makes it easier. If I drop you off, Rick, I'll let Dr. Jasser answer that after I get you off, which you are now. So, Dr. Zuhdi, how do you want to answer that?
Can you repeat the question for me?
Basically,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, basically, good Muslims believe. I got that much done, and then
well, what he was saying is, is there a way for certain good, moderate Muslims to believe in certain Sharia law without really changing their liberty beliefs?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is some people think that Sharia is somehow it's all or none, and Sharia to a Muslim means God's law. So you can find 5 Muslims that would disagree on exactly what are the rules for prayer or diet on certain things, etc. So, yes, you can. This is why I don't believe in the centralization of it. There are many different imams and schools of thought. There's certainly a need today. All of the schools of thought of Sharia are still 13th century settings. There's been a closure of the modernization of Sharia law since the 13th century. So what we need to do is develop a new school of thought based in 21st century foundations of liberty, and from that develop the defense of the secular state, the separation. Not only once you separate mosque and state, then jihad, apostasy, blasphemy laws, all these things melt away because they're all dependent on the need of the state to control allegiance based on Islamic identity. So apostasy is prohibited because you have a citizenship tied to loyalty to the Islamic State. Once you take away the identity of the Islamic State, you can be a citizen and not be a Muslim, and thus you no longer need to have allegiance to the military through jihad, etc. So all these things are intertwined into the Islamic State, and Sharia can be modernized if we first defeat the Islamic State idea.
Makes sense. Go ahead, Dan.
So, Dr. Jasser, I was first introduced to you probably 3-4 years ago, and one of the tools that I used to try to figure out this Islamic stuff was a movie that you're in called The Third Jihad. And do you think that movie's still relevant today with everything that's going on?
It's amazing how the New York Times was beyond merciless in its criticism of it. Even Ray Kelly, who was interviewed in the movie, criticized it. 5 out of 6 days it was on the front page, criticized as a hate flick, and they dismissed the notion that it was actually narrated by a Muslim. And now I'd ask people to watch it and look at what we were concerned about the movement of radical Islam into the West, the threat to our security, the threat of Iran, the threat from within prisons. Look at all of the radicalization that's coming out, the influence of billions from Qatar and Saudi Arabia on the radicalization of American Muslims. And by the way, now as America hands $150 billion to Iran, we used to think that radical Islam was predominantly anti-American because of Sunni Islam, and it was true because it was all from Saudi's billions. Now you're going to see Iran with money to an opening up of sanctions. It's going to now to start to radicalize the Shia population in the West also. Right. So, this is a threat, and the Third Jihad, I think, is more relevant today than ever. It just doesn't talk about ISIS, but the names may change, but the threat stays the same.
Got it.
Yeah, it is exactly. He's exactly right.
I am guessing, you shouldn't guess, but I'm pretty sure, maybe that's a better way for me to say it, that you're not real popular among the radical Islam movement, correct?
We get more threats of apostasy, blasphemy, conspiracy theories thrown my way. The interesting thing is, contrary to some of the non-Muslims that are courageously doing this work, we don't have anybody really show up to protest because they end up looking like fools protesting somebody whose family has helped build 4 mosques in the country, who loves my faith. And, so what they try to do is shout us down before we show up, try to marginalize us and ignore the fact that we have one of the other projects we have is called the American Islamic Leadership Coalition, and we're preparing for later in the year to have a foundational meeting in Washington in which we bring together leaders and people realize that it's not just me and a few other people, that there are multiple organizations of reformists, and the only reason people don't know we exist is the media ignores us, the government ignores us, and universities ignore us because of petrodollars.
Oil dollars, you mean?
Yep.
Yes, the oil dollars that are all going to endowments at Harvard and presidential libraries on both sides of the party. That is an investment that they put in order to prevent the reforms necessary to ultimately unseat the rulers of these countries that are preventing any reform.
And those pockets run really deep, don't they?
billions and billions of cash-heavy countries that confiscated from their people, that imprisoned those who tried to speak out against them. There's a guy in Saudi Arabia that I ask people to look up. His name is Raif Badawi. He was being flogged in front of a mosque every Friday. We tried to get President Obama and the others to understand his plight. Sunni Muslim, ran a group called Free Saudi Liberals, loved his faith, but was flogged for apostasy. Why? Because he criticized the king of Saudi Arabia, criticized clerics, and those are those, when people say, where are the moderate Muslims? They're in the jails in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Egypt.
Dr. Jasser, could you have Tiffany send us that link?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah,
I'll
that'd be
send
great.
you a letter that we signed in which we said we would take flogs for him if the president would at least, tell the king that while he's meeting with him to try to cozy up our allies against the, imbalance of what's happening with Iran, at least take the side of the dissidents there. And I'd love to send you that letter that we sent them.
If it's any consolation, our Christian pastor Saeed in Iran, our current president, won't do anything about either. So not saying that either one of those are right. Both of those are wrong, and it just shows you what our presidency considers more valuable, and that's making deals on the side with these other countries, not really protecting those that really need the protection.
Exactly.
That's what it boils. I'm sorry, guys. That's what it boils down to.
It really does.
I mean, the deal we just made with Iran. Okay, last question. What do you think of that whole deal? You've mentioned a few things about it. I pretty much know where you're coming from, but good deal, bad deal for the U.S.?
Horrific deal. And the reason is we gave away everything we've been storing up in sanctions for years to do what? Pretty much get the same thing we had, which is supposed mirage of inspections, which they claim are going to be verifiable, which they claim will give a breakout time of a year, which they say is going to give them warning about where we inspect, is going to be not of military facilities, is going to actually normalize nuclear research facilities that we've always been concerned about. And the primary issue is it's going to normalize a country, Iran, lifting up sanctions to allow companies like Shell Oil and others to do business in those countries, which are exporters of terrorism. You look at the most genocidal tyrant on the planet right now, which is Bashar Assad and his military. They are fueled. He would not be in existence if it wasn't for Iran today.
That's right.
And they have 150,000 Iranians fighting in Syria to keep them up, and we're handing them $150 billion as a result of this bad deal.
Unbelievable.
Dr. Jasser, what have you got coming up next our listeners should know about, and then how can they find you?
Our website is aifdemocracy.org, aifdemocracy.org, and follow our website. Follow me on Twitter at Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, DRZUHDI Jasser, and on our YouTube channel. And we post all of our interviews. I was just on Fox this morning, and our interviews posted on there. So please follow us on social media.
We'll do it. We'd love to have you back. Dr. Jasser, I really appreciate your time. You stayed longer than what you really expected to do, and you're a gentleman. I appreciate you doing that very much.
Anytime. Thanks for all you do.
You're very welcome. I appreciate it. That was Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dan, thanks for setting that up. Great interview.
No, my pleasure. That was fun.
Answered some great questions from yesterday. All right, real quick. I know we're running out